Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar entitled Keeping Students on Their Transfer Path During the Pandemic and Beyond. Before we get started, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to our funders and partners, College Futures Foundation and ECMC Foundation, because without them, this work wouldn't have been made possible. So a little bit about the organization. So the Research and Planning Group is a nonprofit organization with its roots in membership. So our mission as the representative organization for institutional research planning and effectiveness professionals in the California community college system, we strengthen the ability of college practitioners to discover and undertake high quality research, planning, and assessments that improve evidence-based decision-making, institutional effectiveness, and success for all students. My name is Alyssa Nguyen, and I'm the Senior Director of Research and Evaluation, and I'm joined here by a panel of colleagues to share more about what we learned from some research that we conducted to understand students' experiences during the pandemic, as well as have you all hear from transfer leaders around some of the innovations and resources they engaged in to support students, and then for you to be able to hear directly from a student their experience of navigating transfer during this time.
Hi, my name is Kelly Kuranjeff, and I'm a senior researcher with the RP group, and I have the great privilege of being part of the Through the Gate Transfer Research Initiative and of working and connecting directly with the panelists that you're going to hear from today. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, my name is Brianna Roth, and I'm the former Vice President of Regional Affairs for the Student Senate for California Community Colleges, and I previously worked with the RP group before, so I thank you for having me back. I recently transferred from Irvine Valley College. I spent 3 years there, and then I am now in my first quarter at UC Riverside as a public policy major, so it's great to see everyone, and I'm happy to be here.
And we're so thankful to have you here, Brianna.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Williams, the Career and Transfer Center Coordinator at Berkeley City College, and I'm honored to be sharing this space with you today, and I look forward to hearing all of your stories. Thank you for joining us.
And hello, everyone. My name is Kate Porter, and I am the University Transfer Center Coordinator for Cuesta College, and I'm happy to be with you all today.
And we are happy to have you both, Katie and Andrea, here to be able to share with everyone. So thank you. Okay, so in this webinar, we are going to be providing a very brief overview of the RP Group's Through the Gate Transfer Initiative and share with you all the student and transfer professional perspectives on some of the new challenges to support students with transfer during the pandemic. We'll be sharing some of the adaptations and innovations to meet students' needs that Andrea and Kate specifically provided to their students, and then also share some suggestions for strengthening student transfer moving forward during the pandemic and beyond, and then end the webinar with a few resources and next steps around the work that we've been engaged in to support transfer. So a very brief overview of the Through the Gate study. So the Through the Gate study initiative specifically looked at trying to understand what the transfer landscape looked like in California and identifying a continuum of milestones for students' transfer journey and trying to understand how many students were at different parts of that transfer continuum. So the study itself looked at a population of students that we call high leverage students, students who are near or at the transfer gate. So these are the students who have met most or all of their transfer requirements, but have not yet transferred. And the reason why we focus specifically on this specific student population was because we saw a need and a gap really in the literature around strategies and groups of students that we could be looking at and better supporting to help with the transfer rates, the dismal transfer rates that we were seeing in California. So most of the research, when you look at the transfer literature, focuses primarily on the successes and the experiences of students who have actually transferred. And little attention has been devoted to these high leverage students. That was the primary focus of the Through the Gate work. So in the initial stage of the work in looking at quantifying the population of transfer students, that work really helped us identify and confirm that there is a large proportion of students who have met most or all of their transfer requirements. Looking at a sample of students between 2010 to 2015, we found that in any given year, we're really talking about 50 to 60,000 students who meet that criteria. So in other words, at any given time, we've got 50 to 60,000 community college students who at least on paper appear to have met most or all of their transfer requirements, but have not yet made it through the gate. And so with the first stage of the work, we quantified the problem, but quantifying the problem didn't really tell us a lot about what exactly was impacting their experiences and their abilities to transfer. So in the second phase of the work, we conducted surveys and interviews with over 800 students to try to unpack some of the reasons or factors contributing to their transfer capacity. And so in the second stage of the work, what we found was that there were 4 key themes or factors that kept emerging in what students were sharing with us as some of the factors that either facilitated or inhibited their abilities to transfer. So the 4 factors here, as shown in the slide, represent what we are identifying as the student transfer capacity building framework. So the 4 factors that students shared with us as affecting their capacity for transfer included what we call university affordability. So here students kept referencing and sharing that they weren't quite sure what the true cost of education was and what resources and information related to supporting their university enrollment was. And so of all of the factors listed here in this slide, university affordability emerged as a primary factor or one of the most important factors contributing to students' perception of their capacity for transfer. The second factor that emerged as reasons for why students couldn't or could transfer was what we call pathway navigation. So here students were sharing with us that they really needed timely and accurate information about what was required to successfully transfer at every part of their academic journey. So students had talked about things like, trying to have to triangulate information from multiple sources, not receiving timely information when they needed it, et cetera. And so this really spoke to ensuring that students had all of the relevant information they needed communicated to them so that they could make timely and efficient and effective progress towards their transfer goals. The third factor that emerged in talking to students was their need to constantly balance and negotiate work, family, and school responsibilities. So here, students talked about how, for example, courses wouldn't be scheduled when they needed it. And they talked about how they needed to work and trying to balance and coordinate all of the responsibilities they had in their personal and work lives with the responsibilities they had related to school and trying to navigate and complete all of the requirements related to and in support of their education. The fourth and final factor, support network, spoke to students' really need for a strong network of individuals, both inside the institution and outside of the institution, to support their education, and the need for them to have individuals who really showed that they cared, encouraged, and supported their goals of trying to transfer. What was really highlighted when we talked to these students about what they were grappling with as they were working towards their goal was that, you know, they are trying to transfer for the purposes of improving their social and economic standing, and transfer in of itself was not their end goal. It was a means to their goal for the bachelor's degree. And that the other thing that was pretty crystal clear in talking to students was while they needed all of this information by the community colleges, that there was also information and things they needed from the universities. And so what that really stressed was the importance of ensuring that when we think about students' transfer journey and their experience, that our two systems, the community college system as well as the university system, really need to ensure that there's stronger collaboration and partnership between the two so that we can provide our students with a seamless transfer experience. So as mentioned, most of the work that we did in phase 1 and phase 2 focused on, especially with phase 1, focused on a population of students who were enrolled between 2010, 2015. The follow-up qualitative work happened early at a more current time during around 2019. And so with the pandemic, you know, we had these long-term questions in terms of how will the COVID-19 pandemic impact the educational trajectories of students who are close to the transfer gate? And then what new or different supports will they need to attain their academic goals? We really don't know, given all of the challenges that the pandemic has had on all of the higher education systems. And so this was a question of interest for us during this time. So the other thing I wanted to make note was, while this was the focus of the study related to trying to understand the impact of the pandemic, there were also some intermediate questions that we were interested in learning. And so some of these intermediate questions included things like, how were students' transfer plans specifically affected by the pandemic? What issues did students who are close to transfer face during the pandemic? And then also, how are the 4 factors from the transfer capacity building framework we just referenced currently impacting students' transfer experiences? So what we're going to be sharing is an overview of what we learned in conducting a statewide survey in the spring of 2020 to try to understand how was the students' transfer experiences during this time impacted by the pandemic. So in the statewide survey that we conducted, we received responses from over 8,000 students attending 67 community colleges in the California community college system. This information and trying to answer some of these questions about the the impacts of the pandemic on student transfer experiences was coupled with 2 focus groups that we conducted with students to more deeply understand their experience with transfer and how exactly their plans were impacted by the pandemic. These student perspectives activities were then followed up with interviews with colleges that were rated highly by students in the survey about transfer, communication, and support. And so in today's webinar, we're going to be spotlighting 2 colleges and having Kate and Andrea share specifically some of those innovations and supports that they engaged in to support students during this time. So some key findings from the student survey that we conducted. So 40% of all students who completed the survey indicated that the pandemic impacted their transfer plans. So many of the impacts varied from students changing pathways to delaying plans to canceling transfer plans altogether. Many of the deferrals that students noted when we unpacked that specific data point was that the deferrals were due to not wanting to pay for university tuition online, and or they were waiting for their life to settle back down from all of the chaos that they were experiencing because of the pandemic. What we also learned was that 40% of the students found it harder to access counselors and advisors during this time, and that 33% of students found it difficult to access both community college and university transfer center staff. The other key finding we found was that 68% of students were unaware of any changes made by the community college system, and 75% of students were unfamiliar with changes made by their prospective university. And so so last year during the pandemic, our entire system really got together and made system-wide practice changes as a way to respond to the pandemic and to help ease the process for many of the students. So in this process of easing some of the transfer related practices and processes from both of the segments, there was the specific question we were interested in terms of trying to understand whether these changes that were made by both systems students were even aware. And so these data points here reflect that while the system made efforts to ease the experience and some of the transfer related requirements for students, many of the students were unaware of what those changes were. What we also looked at was whether or not there were any changes in the perceived challenge of the 4 factors that was uncovered from our phase 2 of the work. So this visual here provides some information around the proportion of students who found each of the factors very challenging before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and what they expected to be a challenge in the upcoming year. And so as you can see from this figure here, university affordability continues to be one of the most challenging factors among the 4 factors that either facilitate or inhibit students' capacity for transfer. And then what you can also see from this visual is that before the pandemic and during, for all of the factors, they increased significantly as a perceived challenge, with then for the upcoming year, at least for school life balance, pathway navigation, and support network, we find that students are feeling and reporting that it'll likely be tapering off in terms of the degree by which they feel those factors will be challenging. What is of of note and worthy of note is that while the other factors students are perceiving to eventually get back to similar levels to before the pandemic, university affordability continues to be on the rise in terms of what students are perceiving and feeling will be a continued challenge during and beyond the pandemic. So now that we've shared a little bit about the Through the Gate work and what we've learned from student surveys about students' perceived experiences and actual experiences navigating transfer during the pandemic, I'm now going to hand it off to Kelly, who will share more about what we learned from the interviews, and then have the panels share their specific experiences.
Thanks so much, Alyssa. And just as a reminder, Alyssa mentioned earlier that we had the benefit of connecting directly with transfer leaders and practitioners from 5 colleges that were among a group rated highly by students in our statewide survey for the support and communication they were offering in terms of their transfer to meet their transfer needs during the pandemic. And so now we're going to shift into sharing some of the themes that emerged from those interviews and hearing from Kate and Andrea and Brianna about their own experiences during this period of time. So I'm going to actually take us back to some of those early days of the pandemic. I think we can all remember how chaotic and challenging they were, and some of the issues that emerged in our conversations with Kate and Andrea and a handful of other transfer directors were around some of the new challenges to students' transfer experience that emerged during that period of time. And some of these were issues that may have been around pre-pandemic that were exacerbated by the pandemic. Others have perhaps eased as we've gotten into the pandemic, and others are still fairly acute. So, one of the biggest issues that we heard universally was that in the early days and as we continue to be in the midst of the pandemic, students are exhibiting a greater need for empathy and hands-on support. That the move to a remote delivery of services, the continued uncertainty of the moment that we're in has just led to a need for more hands-on kind of hand-holding of students as they work through their transfer process, and the need for extra connection. So where before, perhaps if you were face-to-face, you could knock something out, now students are exhibiting perhaps a need for more repeated support around an application or around their transfer journey. And that, kind of overlaying that is the need for support for mental health services that, where students may have had challenges navigating the transfer journey before, those challenges are compounded by all of the stress and anxiety that the pandemic has caused, and particularly for students who may have be from our communities of color that are experiencing disproportionate impact as we move through the pandemic. So another issue that we all are not, it should not be a surprise, but that the move to online learning was hard for many of our colleges, that this need to go completely remote overnight was really challenging, and that it meant a upstart of and an embrace of technology and to practices that our colleges were really unaccustomed to. And that, of course, has a reverberating impact on students who are looking to transfer. Another major issue that emerged was this disconnect between students and the university. So the absence of face-to-face connection on campus through, visits by university reps on on the community college campus, or the opportunity for students to go to universities, to check them out, to learn more, to get questions answered. Of course, all of that had been disrupted in the early days of the pandemic. And then finally, this issue around students feeling like they are experiencing reduced access to UCs and CSUs emerged. New barriers in terms of the capacity of the UC system and the CSU system to accept transfer students, whether it be in high demand programs or because there were increased demands among both non-transfer and transfer students to get into those institutions. And then in some cases, there were issues that were expressed around students who were highly qualified getting rejected because of small errors on their applications that might have been addressed had they been getting support face-to-face. So those were all kind of new challenges that emerged in an already kind of fraught context where students were struggling to navigate their way through the gate. So I'm going to shift now to, let's hear from Kate and Andrea and Brianna about how those new challenges played out in your own experience. And Kate, I don't know if you mind kicking us off to talk about, you really spoke to this need for increased empathy and hand-holding among the students you work with. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like in those early days and how it's playing out now?
Absolutely. Sure, Kelly. I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, at Cuesta College, we really did see that our students needed more empathy and support from our transfer personnel. And we saw that students had bigger transfer considerations to discuss and address due to the pandemic. Our conversations with students really shifted from big picture transfer planning to the immediate moment and what was going on with that student in the moment and how they were coping with all of the changes to online classes, handling technology challenges, battling, anxiety and heightened stress because of COVID and different impacts from the pandemic. And then also just potential changes to their transfer goals because of the pandemic. Even though, as counselors, I know, we really try to create a supportive and warm environment for our students, but during the pandemic, we felt this was more important than ever, and especially in this virtual format as well. And we saw that students needed to have a safe space to talk about their feelings and concerns. They needed to feel supported in this new virtual world that we were all trying to navigate through. And they needed to know that we were accessible in our Zoom lobbies, by email, by phone, and by virtual appointments, even when our campus doors were closed. Students really expressed anxiety about whether or not they were going to be passing their classes and how that might impact their transfer. And so we really tried to make sure to provide clear messaging and guidance and reassurance to students as well. The types of questions that we started hearing from students also changed. We started hearing questions about, will my university classes be online? Or can I defer my enrollment until they're not online anymore? Will the cost be the same if I'm taking my university classes online? And then even, students that were highly motivated to transfer, but were very fearful about taking the step to move to a new area or county during the middle of this pandemic when things felt so uncertain. So we really found students needed reassurance that it was okay to change their transfer plans if they needed to. And then also we would encourage them to self-reflect and really take some time to think about what was the right approach for them personally. And then also just to give themselves grace if they needed to adjust their plans. So we found that students did need more hand-holding, especially our students that were in their final year at Cuesta. And so they wanted that additional help through every part of the process, from completing their applications to making their decisions after they'd heard about admissions to, wrapping their minds around how to actually have a successful transfer. And so we found that we did more follow-up email and follow-up appointments with students than in years past, just to help really provide that extra hand-holding. And I had one student that I worked with this past year who I got to know quite well throughout our many interactions. And he was a first-generation college student, a very strong student, a high achieving student who was well prepared, but just very, very concerned that he was going to miss a critical step. And when I went back and looked, we had connected 23 times throughout the course of the year, by appointment, by phone, or by email, just to make sure that all of his questions were answered. And he did end up, ultimately having a successful transfer, but we were, providing so much more support through the whole process. And then unfortunately, some of the students that we worked with, they ultimately made the decision that they did not feel comfortable transferring because of the pandemic. And those were hard conversations to have, because we knew how hard they had worked to get to that point, and certainly did not want them to walk away from their transfer goals. But also felt that it was important for them to, listen to their inner voice and honor it if it wasn't the right time. So, invited them back to continue the conversation when the timing was right. And I'm hopeful that they will return, to their transfer goals when they are ready. Yeah, so these are some of the things that we saw.
It really gives texture to that 40% number that, Alyssa shared earlier, of students changing, whether they putting their plans on hold or abandoning them altogether. So we appreciate that insight. And, Andrea, you have spoken about just the challenge of moving to the online environment and how that played out on your campus and how that impacted students and impacted you as a transfer center director and the staff that you're working with. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, the pandemic really brought attention to how some colleges and students were limited in their access, and fluency to technology. And just community colleges are diverse by design in terms of what students attend and who makes up the college community, and their knowledge and comfortability with technology and remote services is very diverse, and that can be really challenging. And that could be a lack of resources on students' part. It could be technological capacity for our colleges. It could just be, fear of the unknown, of what's to come. Really, unfortunately, impacted the ability for some colleges to change and transition to remote services. And really, colleges had to reimagine how they provided support to students in a remote environment. And you have to look at it from the scope of diversity of community colleges in general. Academic support and student service support can look very different in a remote setting. In working with different, community college members, we had to figure out quickly, how are we going to transition all of these support services to a remote or an online environment. And I think some colleges really struggled with that, through no fault of their own. And I think that the difference in terms of our community is that we were committed as an institution to transitioning services in a remote environment in an intentional and student services way. And I think that unfortunately, some colleges that were not able to transition early on, that students struggled and the community struggled in general. I'm hoping, and I think that just this opportunity to really reimagine how we offer services to students, both technologically and in person, I hope that will provide colleges an idea about how they provide services in the future, whether we stay partly remote or completely in person. And I'm looking at this as an opportunity to kind of reimagine how that will look in the future.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Now, I'm curious, Brianna, from the student perspective, you were going through your final semesters of your community college experience, gearing up to transfer as we were really getting into the heart of the pandemic. And you discussed with me some challenges around UC and CSU choice and selection and access. So can you tell us a little bit from the student perspective, some of those challenges that you encountered that perhaps might not have been there pre-pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. Well, for me, since it was like my last semester, so when I started my fall semester, I was already applying, and I applied very broadly, just because I did change my major multiple times during my community college experience, but a couple times actually during the pandemic. So I didn't really have a lot of time to kind of evaluate, what requirements I would need. But since it was a very multidisciplinary major like public policy, I had enough room in my schedule to kind of add those classes on. But for UC Riverside, that was the only college that had public policy as an undergraduate major. And for the other universities, I really had to try to blend requirements that only applied to like one college because the major was similar enough to public policy, but it wasn't quite there. So I feel like if I did have more time, and I did consider staying a fourth year just so that I could maximize my ability and my options to transfer. But I felt like if I did have more time, and maybe if the pandemic wasn't occurring, I could have received more help on which requirements are actually necessary for certain places to transfer, giving me more location options, like something closer to home or something just a little more cheaper for me. That was something I really struggled with, but in the end, I did make the decision to transfer because I didn't want to. Really, I knew I had to bite the bullet because I needed to transfer. That was a part of my transfer path, and so luckily, one of my first choices was UC Riverside in the School of Public Policy. But that wasn't just the end of the struggles. Once I actually transferred, there was a lot of information discrepancies that I feel like a lot of my fellow transfer colleagues, because we kind of built up a network of those from orientation, we all felt that there was a lot of information we just weren't getting, because while we're junior standing students and we're expected to kind of have the whole college thing down, we were also treated like first year students, in the sense where there was certain requirements or exemptions we had to fill out, like for bringing your car to your apartment, that I wasn't told about. And then I had to wait pretty much until a couple days before I moved in to decide, okay, am I going to continue moving in? And then I found out I was able to get parking. And it was just things like that where I would call certain numbers on the campus and it would direct you to like press 1 to speak to a representative. And then I would press the number and then the call would actually end. And I just had no way of connecting. And the campus wasn't entirely open, so I couldn't just march down there and say, hey, I need help with this. The second thing that was really difficult for me that I'm kind of experiencing more now is financial aid. And I had the same situation where I would call the financial aid office and it was just really hard to get in contact with somebody. And as a community college student, I didn't need to rely on financial aid in order to pay my way through college. I was in the Promise program, so I was really fortunate to just be able to pay my tuition. So once I had to start getting more versed in the financial aid and do I take out loans? Am I going to get enough grants or scholarships? It was really hard to get in contact with someone. And even though I filled out all the forms on time, there were still some things that I had missed deadlines I didn't know about. I never got an email. It wasn't until I found certain parts of the website and kind of connected the dots myself. And then also just the process in general, filling out a financial aid form. My parents do claim me on their tax forms, but I am borderline independent. So it was, I kind of navigated these things all of myself. And yeah, I didn't have enough information to go through with it by certain deadlines. In fact, although I've been born and raised in California my whole life, I graduated from California Community College in high school and everything like that, I was a California resident. However, there was a form that I didn't know I needed to fill out, and I looked at my tuition statement and I was like, well, gosh, $32,000 seems like a lot. And it wasn't until I kind of went through some hoops and found like the right person to talk to ask them, hey, what do I need to do to make sure I'm a California resident, I was able to get a refund at that point. But these barriers, if they come upon certain students who don't have the time to navigate them, like I feel like I really had to go out of my way. I had to, for the past few weeks I've been in the quarter, I feel like I have been focusing less on my studies and more about my circumstances. And for some students, even though they get through the gate, they might have to turn around, because if they have different family priorities, they have different work obligations, they need to, they're a part-time student, that's enough to deter a student from completing their transfer process, which is in the end goal, completing your bachelor's degree and completing your educational goals in that sense. So I feel like that was something I really struggled with, and had I had more information and more connection to the universities I was interested in transferring to, that process would have been much smoother, and overall my academic success would have been higher for me.
Thanks so much for bringing that up. And this issue around communication and connection is a persistent one. And of course, it has been exacerbated by the pandemic and is having a reverberating impact, as we're hearing, from you, on the student experience, as well as on the experience of those working on university campuses and the college campuses. Despite better efforts, sometimes the communication and information flow isn't there. And actually, as we look to the next segment of our discussion here, one of the things that was really notable when talking to Kate and Andrea and a few of their colleagues was the ways that your colleges have been adapting and innovating to bring students and the campus closer together in the virtual space, or to bring students and universities closer together in the virtual space through leveraging technology in creative ways, by being very intentional about student-facing communication efforts, as well as informing the entire campus about resources and supports that you were providing to students around their transfer journey, despite being forced to move to an online delivery. And really being creative about how you were meeting students where they were, to provide ongoing support in more innovative and creative ways in an online world. All of this is a really interesting adaptation that you all were making. And I just need to say that it wasn't like you suddenly started being student-centered when the pandemic hit. So, what we found in having these conversations with you all was really striking, is that there was a commitment to being student-centered in your transfer support pre-pandemic that allowed you to quickly pivot and make these adaptations and innovations to the way you were serving students. And you had already, identified priorities in terms of ways you wanted to get closer to the student and really support them all across their community college journey and make it through the gate. So, having that foundation in place, it seems, was really critical to your ability to quickly adapt once the pandemic hit. So, I'm curious if, Andrea, you wouldn't mind starting by kicking us off by talking about your incredible effort to really rapidly move all of your services online, and not only move them online, but make sure everyone was aware that those supports were then available in the virtual space.
Sure, I would be happy to.
Thank you.
I remember the day we closed was March 13th, 2020. And I really understood the gravity of what it meant for the campus to be closed for an undetermined amount of time. And also, the difficulty that this closure was going to present, not just for students, but just the BCC, community as a whole. I am a one-person department. So I have already, thankfully, embedded some sort of, technological support for students prior to the pandemic. However, I also employ students to provide peer-to-peer mentorship, transfer support. And so I leveraged, their kind of technological knowledge and experience to build connections with students in a remote environment. We were able to transition our department to fully remote services in diverse ways. We used social media, we used Zoom appointments, one-on-one workshops. We've used platforms like Discord, where students can create a login and ID and ask questions in real time. I also pushed the college to purchase a platform called Talk, in which the entire Berkeley City College website was installed in within 2 weeks of closing, where students can go online and speak to departments in real time about questions, concerns, support needed. And it could be, even if they logged on and they came to the transfer center talk function and said, I don't understand how to access something in admissions and records, we had the capacity to transfer them in real time. It was really important that myself and the team of students that I work with communicate with students that we are available and we are here to support you. It might be in a different platform and environment, that the service that we're going to offer will be hopefully as impactful as if it were in person. And we were able to transition almost to fully remote services within 1 week. And with that, I communicated with faculty, staff, the administration. We sent out blast emails that we were offering fully remote services. We sent blast texts and emails to students, letting them know that we were offering fully remote services. And we really were intentional about how we provided that information, and also intentional that although technology can feel a little removed, that in whatever way that we could provide that service, we would. And I really leveraged, honestly, young people have a lot more technologically savvy than I am. And so I used students a lot and asked them, like, what do you believe is the best way to reach students in a remote environment? We've never been in this circumstance before. And thinking about how we leverage technology in a way that provides service to students is important to imagine now and also in the future. And I'll be also doing something a little bit different once we do return to campus about how we use technology and support to students, because community colleges are diverse in general. And students that go there, they don't always have the same needs that other students do in a sort of a formal four-year institutional environment. We have people that have families, that have other responsibilities, that don't have the luxury of coming to campus every day for X amount of hours a day. So I feel like for me, if I can find a way to use technology to reach a broader audience in student support, then that's important for me to reimagine that.
Thanks so much. And I think this strategic communication and outreach is, something that you and Kate share in terms of your approach. And Kate, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your efforts to really be very thoughtful and strategic about how you reach out to different campus constituents and students to make sure they were aware of the support that was available.
Absolutely. Yeah, during the pandemic, our University Transfer Center really started using email to give students the information that they needed. And we had in past had a quarterly newsletter, a transfer newsletter for our students, but we made this a monthly newsletter, letting them know all of the important things that were going on that month, important transfer deadlines, reminders, let them know about our resources. And then one thing also that we do at Cuesta, our student services department sends out an email to all students every Monday. to let them know what's going on that week. And that includes our transfer center workshops and activities. And we found that through this increased email outreach to students, we had much higher numbers of students signing up for our workshops and attending our workshops and participating in our activities because of that outreach. We also did an email blast to students who we had determined were transfer eligible and encouraged them to apply to universities and let them know that it looked like it's the right time for them to be applying. We also, we changed the tone in our messaging to students as well. And I think, a lot of campuses did this in the pandemic, but shifting into messaging just that was more supportive and encouraging to students, and really sending out that message that, you've got this and we believe in you, we're here for you, while also reminding students to remember to take good care of themselves during this challenging time and to reach out to us for help when they needed it. We worked diligently to get a Canvas shell created for our University Transfer Center. And we found that has been another great way to get information out to students through Canvas. And in that, we also added videos that we created and transfer planning activities and worksheets that we created to kind of help students along with transfer. And like Andrea at Berkeley City College, we also increased our use of social media, knowing that this was, an avenue to reach students. So we used, Instagram to promote our activities and also to allow students to ask transfer questions and then get answers then posted, to their questions. We also used Instagram to celebrate our students' transfer success in the spring with social media posts where students shared out which universities they would be attending in the fall. And it was just so wonderful and heartwarming to see those posts and see, our students so proud that they were moving on to their universities. We really honed in on helping students in their final year at Cuesta understand those critical steps to transfer, because we found that they really need a good understanding of what that whole year involves, and that it's not just completing and submitting that application, but there are steps that come after that they need to be on the lookout for, or else they might miss out on admission. So we really tried to focus in on messaging students to make sure that they knew about these steps and the important deadlines that followed application submission. We also launched a new series of virtual next steps after admission workshops in the spring with partnership with our UC and CSU admission reps. And we also had former Cuesta students that had successfully transferred on to our local universities attend as well. So that way our students could get all of their questions answered, not only from our transfer center personnel, but also from their university admissions representative, and then get the student perspective and these tips from students who had successfully transferred as well. So we found that these were very well attended and students reported they really enjoyed the format. So we're going to continue those on in years to come as well. We also know that, as mentioned, that the cost of university is a primary concern for students. So we have really implemented a campaign to get the message out about how to understand university cost and affordability, and also messaging out about programs like the UC Blue and Gold Scholarship in every single one of our transfer workshops and newsletters. We mentioned that scholarship, and we've actually seen a dramatic increase in our numbers of students applying to UCs, actually admitted at UCs and enrolling at UCs. And many of our students have actually reported that it was because they had found out about the scholarship and they knew that they would qualify for it. So it opened their minds up to the UC, but really just helping students understand how they can figure out how they can cover the cost of their bachelor's degree is something that we're really focusing on right now and getting that message out to students. So these are just some of the adaptations and innovations that we've deployed at Cuesta.
Thanks so much. And I know, Brianna, that some of the strategies that your campus used, you mentioned around social media being a particular new strategy that was particularly useful, and not just to students who were close to the gate, but who were perhaps beginning their journey. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the new supports that you experienced on your campus as you were approaching the transfer gate?
Yeah, definitely. Something I really noticed, and both Kate and Andrea kind of honed in on this too, is that technology really was being used in more creative ways, I would say. And I guess that is a silver lining of the pandemic that hopefully, and I'm assuming most campuses are realizing it helps students a lot, so they should continue it even outside of the pandemic when everything's a little more normal. But one thing I really noticed is that there were a lot of Instagram accounts developed by my college for different things like the Transfer Center, Student Life and Equity, the Pride Scholars, pretty much any department, even Guided Pathways had like their own Instagram account, and then they had a lot of students follow it. And then what would happen is, say the Transfer Center would post something like, okay, tag deadline is coming up, make sure to do your tag. Here's drop-in hours for certain counselors, things like that. And then different accounts related to the college would repost them on their Instagram stories, so that even if you were just following, say, like the Guardian Scholars account because you're a Guardian Scholar, those programs would realize, oh, let's repost this so that students who are transferring can see this information. And I think that just having that exposure, because some students were mostly at home, and then using different technologies such as Discord that was mentioned, and more students gravitated towards social media to kind of keep up with others and their institutions. It really, colleges, I feel, and my college especially, did a really good job of finding where students are and then being very intentional with the messaging there and who is receiving information and how can we make it more clear. There's this one helpful application that you can kind of link with your Instagram account called Linktree, and you have a link that you can put in the bio basically of your profile for that account, and then you can put helpful links within that. And I think a lot of different accounts with my college use that, and I think it was really helpful in helping students access certain things on the website that aren't necessarily easy to find just if you go on the website in general. And then one thing that I found that was super helpful is that especially with excused withdrawals and different like pass, no pass options, students had a lot of questions about like, hey, can I still transfer if I do this option? How do I get it? How do I change my withdrawal to an excused withdrawal? How do I submit that petition? I had a couple scenarios where I did have an excused withdrawal for a class and I had to submit a petition for it. And I was actually waiting for my registration deadline to come up so that I could enroll for the class in the spring semester. And I had some issues getting that done in a timely process, but I was able to call the admissions and records, and they were actually super helpful. They expedited the process, and they were able to be more responsive than I thought they were really before the pandemic. So it's not just the Transfer Center that's been using more technology and being more responsive, but each department of the campus really has kind of pitched forth their responsiveness and been more available to students and more accessible really than I thought they were before when you were on campus.
It's a great segue to, I think, where we're headed next with this discussion, which is, looking forward, what are ways that we can continue to strengthen student transfer, recognizing that the pandemic is not over, it's evolving, and that we have a new normal as we move forward into the future, and yet we still have a really strong interest in closing opportunity gaps for students around transfer and increasing the number of students, particularly students from disproportionately impacted groups who are reaching their bachelor's degree goal. because we know transfer is not the goal, it's a milestone along the way to the goal of bachelor's degree. So, many things emerged out of our conversations with the transfer center directors that we've mentioned, and my conversation with Brianna around, what are some of the kind of the key areas of opportunity as we look forward. And, certainly you have all mentioned that this pandemic has had some silver lining in the sense that we have made possible what we previously thought was impossible, and that there has been innovation and change that has been super productive for students in many different ways. Andrea, you and Kate have mentioned that you've had a greater uptake in your services, in this virtual environment. And some things have worked really well for certain groups of students, and some things maybe not so much, but overall there has been in some ways more access and awareness of the resources and supports that you're providing through your transfer centers respectively. And that is a real opportunity for our colleges. And as we look to the future, there are opportunities at the community college level, at the university level, across our higher ed systems that that we can look to, that you have all kind of commonly spoken to as we look forward. Alyssa, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide to the next section, that'd be great. Thanks so much. So when we look at, kind of the conversation we've had so far, there's definitely been, a theme around consistent messaging and communication, and that's across systems and segments, both about the requirements for transfer as well. And that's all the way from what do I need to do to get to the point where I'm ready to apply, to what is entailed in the application process, to what happens once I've applied and, I accepted or perhaps denied, and how do you navigate that post-application process? So, questions around, and communication issues around just the steps to take, as well as around the supports and resources that are available, both academically and in terms of non-academic supports and financial supports to make transfer and achieving your bachelor's degree possible. It's a whole lot of opportunity there. There are these questions around, how do we streamline processes for transfer students so they're more student-centered and easy to navigate. So it's not that you need to have information on a 50-step process, but perhaps a simplified process is easier to navigate. And that's, again, across all segments. And then there's this issue around capacity, expanding the capacity of our systems to serve students on community college campuses who are interested in transferring, to receive students post-transfer in the CSU and the UC, and to know what's happening between our institutions around, having a greater capacity to share data and information, so we know how students are moving from our community colleges to the UC or CSU, and where there are successes and where there are opportunities for strengthening those transfer pathways. All of those issues have implications at the community college level. They have implications for our universities, for our higher ed segments, and for students themselves. So I'm wondering, Andrea, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, talking about maybe some ideas in terms of how community colleges can strengthen student transfer looking forward.
So really, transfer really must be an institutional commitment and not focused around an individual or a departmental responsibility. Every facet of a college community, whether it be faculty, classified professionals, admin, and even students, current alumni, have a really important role in intentional support around student successful transfer capacity. in every aspect of a student's journey, whether it be how you are greeted or accepted once you enter the college, through your experience in your courses, through the kind of service that you are offered in a service and or an instructional capacity, plays a huge role in how students feel included on campus and supported, and can make a difference between whether a student returns the next day or they are successfully supported all the way through, not just through the application period. I like to look at transfer as through inception to completion. I speak to students now currently who are at UC Berkeley or California State University, East Bay. I still have an intentional relationship with them because it's my responsibility to ensure that they're successful in their life's journey. And I cannot do that alone. And so I need partners, not just institutionally, but in terms of California State Universities and University of California. They also need to be more inclusionary in how they provide support to students, as well as instead of having students seek out support from them, they need to provide direct service on community college campuses in order to support them and their success in transfer.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. And, you know, Brianna, I think you had some ideas about ways from the student perspective, community colleges might be able to better support students in their transfer journey from the get-go all the way through the gate.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one thing I noticed really as a student and as a student leader is that there was a significant increase in the amount of grade grievances that we took on our campus. And a lot of those were actually to do with, incidents in the classroom, inequities, certain barriers that maybe professors weren't necessarily trying to hark on students' efforts, claiming that maybe they've tried to submit academic dishonesty in their work and stuff like that. But I think there's also a component we need to realize in that when we talk about resources on the campus, we need to loop professors and instructors into that too, because most students aren't going to be going to the transfer center on the daily. They're not going to be relying on those resources as much as other students, but each student does have a front-facing connection with the professor. And so I think one thing that we need to realize is that, what professors need to be a little bit more empathetic on is to realize that students, maybe their top 5 priorities don't include their class. And I think the pandemic has kind of helped to highlight that. And I think that if that's what it's taken to have more empathy in the classroom for a professor to say, maybe students are experiencing different things outside of their classes, how can I accommodate them? How could I ensure that their success isn't reflected by the things that they can't control in their lives? And I think that compassion, that level of, while you're teaching a subject and you're helping a student to learn what their major is going to entail and learn those lifelong skills, you're also helping them to realize that their circumstances aren't stopping them from succeeding, and that their how skilled they are in a certain subject doesn't rely on the amount of time that they have more than other students just because of their circumstances. And so that's one thing I would really like to see community colleges and faculty and staff all together realize, that a student's experience in college is not just what resources are reaching out to them, it's how professors are recognizing the value that they bring to the classroom despite different circumstances. And maybe, if they can't commit to more things such as other students in their class, that they're able to make accommodations. They're able to say, I won't take so many points off of your grade because you submitted it after 11:59 p.m. because everyone in your household was using the internet at the same time. And things like that. I really think that that's going to make the difference for a lot of students if they even stay on the course that they're trying to pursue, like their major. Some students have genuinely changed their major because they've had lackluster experiences in the classroom with certain subjects.
I just want to put a shout out for a resource that we developed in tandem with the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. It's and we'll share a link to it at the end of this session, and it's about how faculty can support students on their transfer journey at the classroom and program levels. And one of the first points is around showing compassion, sharing your own journey, educational journey, recognizing maybe the lessons you learned along the way as a student, and mistakes you might have made and the way you got to your goal, and really humanizing that your own educational journey in the classroom, and recognizing that students are grappling with many different challenges, both inside and outside of campus, just as we talked about earlier when we talked about the factors that are in play in the student transfer capacity building framework. So, faculty, like you said, Brianna, are oftentimes students' only contact with campus, and especially in this remote environment that we're still in. So appreciate that point. Kate, would you mind sharing some of your ideas about ways universities might be able to continue to evolve and adapt their practices in support of student transfer, recognizing the interest in increasing transfer student success and reaching higher outcomes in the state?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that each California community college might have a different or unique perspective on, what would be a best way to strengthen university transfer for their students, and possibly based on their location and local university's capacity. But at Cuesta College, we are the biggest feeder college into Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And many students attend Cuesta either moving in from out of the area or coming from our local high schools, with the hopes of transferring to Cal Poly, which, as you know, has very competitive admissions. So this presents challenges for our students with their primary campus of interest. And our Cuesta students do not have priority admission consideration at our primary feeder CSU, as is given for students at other California community colleges with their feeder campuses, like San Diego State, for example. Also, associate degrees for transfer might help our students enter into California state universities outside of our county. But because Cal Poly SLO only honors 5 of our 36 associate degrees for transfer, for most of our students, the ADT does not provide any benefit at the student's primary campus of interest. So, we do have unique challenges at Cuesta, and also we are a Hispanic serving institution. And I know, your research, Kelly, and the RP group research has shown that Latinx students report that having universities they can attend near their home is highly motivating, which, presents a challenge for our Latinx student population who want to stay close to home, since Cal Poly SLO admission is so competitive, and there are no other local public university options for our students. So it would be fantastic if a transfer admission guarantee program could be created for California community colleges in a position like Cuesta, with their biggest feeder CSU campus, similar to the way the UC TAG program works. Or, another potential solution would be to bring more CSU bachelor's programs to California community college campuses, especially for majors that have a high application rate and a low admission rate at that local CSU. We've also, since the pandemic, been hearing more students expressing interest in online degree programs, and the CSU and the UC could consider expanding their online bachelor's degree options beyond what is currently available, which is the Cal State online options. And, sometimes they just don't offer the majors that our students are looking for. So we end up having to refer students to out of state or private university online program options that are much more expensive. One thing, we noticed last cycle specifically that some of our UCs and competitive CSUs had a record number of applicants. And so this definitely impacted the outcome for some of our transfer applicants. And we saw universities increasing their use of a wait list. And this really became a very frustrating situation for some of our students that were very competitive applicants, and completely prepared, yet waitlisted at multiple campuses. So it just created a very unsettling situation for them. And one student that I worked with was waitlisted at all 4 campuses that he applied to, even though he had a 3.5 GPA and all of his major requirements completed. And he ended up having to come back to Cuesta again because he wasn't given that admission. I hope that our universities will continue to use the outreach strategies that they have been using, that we really are seeing they're working, like their increased email outreach to students, offering support through the application process, connecting with students and offering virtual appointments. And at Cuesta, we have some wonderful reps that we work with at CSU and UC campuses who really do go above and beyond for our students. And they do help us address issues when they arise. And in some cases, they actually have helped us actually take a student that was denied and help that application to be reevaluated and then overturn that decision so that the student was in fact admitted. I had an example of this past spring, a student who had made a half unit coursework entry error on her CSU application and was denied admission at Fresno State. And so she reached out to us. We contacted our rep at Fresno State. And within 5 minutes, he got back to us and said, hey, I took it forward. We got the decision overturned. She's been admitted. We're excited to have her this fall. So, having reps like that are really willing to go above and beyond to assist our students and help us with these kinds of situations is just so incredibly important for us. And some CSU campuses do not give us a specific admissions representative. They just direct you to the regular admissions email website or email to get questions answered. And so it's really hard to not having a person that you can reach out to directly for help and assistance, especially with issues like this.
And it underscores the need that, while the technology can facilitate so much, that still we need to have those interpersonal connections and relationships and find ways to make those connections real for students so they can address what is a small error that can have such a profound impact. And it's a really important story about still having to have the human element connected to these technological solutions that have really helped, and yet we know relationships really matter. Andrea, do you want to share a little bit? You had some ideas about ways our higher ed systems might be thoughtful about strengthening student transfer moving forward too.
I believe that the way in which, I guess, and we can talk a little bit more about the new assembly bill and how that's being implemented and how the lens of transfer really should look in terms of successful transfer. But honestly, I feel like the way in which we address or look at transfer is that the responsibility heavily falls on the community colleges to ensure that students are meeting the general education requirements, that they're successfully moving through their courses, that they understand all of the aspects of transfer, meaning how to complete the applications, what are the deadlines, how do you support students around successfully completing the application, what happens in the next steps. And I really believe that University of California system, CSUs need to take a greater role in supporting community colleges in successful transfer. Like bring the service to the student instead of forcing students to seek that out through the community college system. I'm really building more intentional relationships and supports with centers on four-year institutional campuses just for that. For example, the University of California, Berkeley has an actual transfer center for community colleges, students that are seeking transfer to that institution. You do not have to be accepted. They're providing embedded support. And I highly suggest that other universities think about providing support and service like that, because that's not always offered at four-year institutions. Providing more intentional relationships, workshops to community colleges to really provide students with impactful support for transfer.
Just sitting here talking to myself on mute. Thanks so much, Andrea. And I'm going to actually ask Brianna to bring us home. If we think, one of the things that came up too through these discussions with transfer center directors is the ways that students can support themselves through this process and advocate for their own success. And I'm just wondering, Brianna, if you have any advice, as you have made it successfully through the grade, and we're just so happy for you that you are not only on a campus that you're excited about, but in a program that you feel really fantastic about. Any thoughts looking back over this past year?
Yeah, definitely. If I had to think about maybe one thing I would do differently is I would definitely reach out more, not just to the transfer center or the counseling center, but look to different communities on my campus. One of the things that we really leveraged as a whole college is using Discord, and there was a lot of different clubs and other student equity-based programs that did have a lot of support for students, and I feel like I could have utilized those more throughout community college. I also would have leveraged more connections I had with professors, maybe that came from, they did certain programs that I was interested in, or they went to a particular university that I was interested in applying to. And I think overall, what I would have utilized more is those connections with the transfer representatives at different universities. So like we heard, I believe, Kate, you mentioned there was a student who made a very minor error on their application. And something like that, I don't even know if I would have known the first step to see, like, was my application rejected because of a small error? Was it something I could have looked into? And so I guess broadly, I would say don't give up on yourself. You may have gotten rejected by your dream school, but it doesn't have to be an evaluation of your skills and the value you have as a student. Maybe there's something to look into more. Question the system. Ask your counselor, review things. I wish I would have had more time to get a review in for my personal insight questions for the UC application, and also just having someone look over my application more. That I think could have made the difference between like being on the wait list and actually getting admitted or something like that. And then another piece of advice I would give is to, have different plans on different campuses. So you may have this one college or this university you're very invested in getting into, you have all the requirements, or you're pursuing those requirements, you're looking into different campus organizations, but leave your options open. For me, actually, just because I came from Irvine Valley College, I thought UC Irvine was going to be like the end all be all. And towards the beginning of my transfer journey, I was pretty much just going to apply to that college. I was going to tag, but because of the pandemic and some things in my life that had happened, I didn't meet the tag requirements necessarily. So I really started to get into brainstorming mode, and I was looking at what other campuses have programs I'm interested in. And that's when I just discovered UC Riverside was pretty much an ideal fit for me. I was a very competitive applicant for that campus. I met all the tag requirements that were very particular to that school, like the school public policy. And I just felt like I was able to let go of some of the goals I had at different campuses, and not just feel that the ones on the campus that I got admitted to were sufficient, but I knew I was going to thrive there because I was really open with the possibilities. Because when you're applying and you're waiting for that decision in March and April, you're at a point where it's like a spoken wheel. You're in the middle, and there are many different outcomes depending on where you get into and where you actually submit your registration to. So keep your options open and don't give up on yourself.
I love that. That's a great way to close us out, and want to just do one plug for a resource that is coming out in the next week that we are developing in partnership with the Student Senate for California Community Colleges, that they have aptly named Take Charge of Your Transfer Success. And this is a resource that's designed specifically for students, but it can also be used by transfer counselors, student services professionals, faculty on campuses, and it maps out different steps students can take all along their transfer journey to increase their chances of making it through the gate, based on our research and conversations that we've had with many different students and practitioners over the past number of years. So please stay tuned for that resource too. I just want to do a very hearty thank you and deep appreciation to our panelists for such incredible insight, for your time, and for the work that you're doing. We are deeply, deeply grateful for your partnership, and just so thankful for your time this afternoon. Thank you for enlightening us and sharing with your peers. We have, as we're rounding the bend here, a list of the presenters and how you can reach us. We'll be sharing out, and I don't know if you want to go back one slide, Alyssa, to the resources. We'll be sharing out at the end of this week, be releasing transfer leaders speak, and that will be a summary of the findings from our conversations with Andrea and Kate and 3 other transfer center directors across the state. We'll be releasing that on Friday. All of you will receive a copy of it. It'll also be on our website and going out through our social. Take Charge of Your Transfer Success, the resource I just mentioned for students, will be released on November 1 in the same manner. I think Alyssa put in the chat a number of links to different resources that have already been released that are coming out of the Through the Gate Transfer Initiative, including the faculty resource we mentioned, a resource specific for student services professionals on how to support students who are with their concerns around university affordability, as well as the summary of our survey findings, investigating students' experience of transfer during the peak of COVID. And I think that we are at our end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.